good evening and shalom. And I shall read poems in English translation. Part of these translations have been made by Harold Schimmel, by Asya Gutman. And the last two books I actually did together with Ted Hughes, who does not know Hebrew, but I translated a kind of word-by-word translation, and then we shaped it into, made it again. It was like some kind of plastic surgery where you try to make something again out of, because when you translate, you take things apart, and then you have to reshape it again. Maybe this city of Washington deserves it that I shall start with two songs of peace. My son smells of peace when I lean over him. It isn't just the soap. Everybody was once a child with a smell of peace, and in the whole country there isn't a single windmill which turns. O torn country, like torn clothes which can't be mended, and hard, lonely forefathers in Hebron's grave in childless silence. My son smells of peace. His mother's womb promised him that which God can't promise us. Later I shall read also a few of the poems in the Hebrew original, and I actually, whenever I'm asked if I prefer to read my own poems in translation, I say yes, because it's a strange thing, because poems are mostly very personal, and when I read them in my own language, in which I first, when they first came to me out of life, so they were very personal, like love poems or other poems. So if they are translated, they are a little away from me, and so it's actually not my poem. So I'm not. No one will ask me who is she or who is he, or and so on, which is a kind of a game we all play when we say something very crucial, like "I love you" or certain things. We suddenly say them in a foreign language, because then it's a little off. It becomes estranged. I shall read you another poem about peace. My love was not in the war. She learns love and history of my body, which was in 2 or 3. And at night, when my body makes battles into peace, she is bewildered. Her perplexity is her love and her learning, her wars and her peace, her dream. I am now in the middle of my life, the time when one begins to collect facts and many details and exact maps of a country we shall never occupy, and of an enemy and lover whose borders we shall never cross. This poem is one of my earlier poems and speaks about the war of my father, which I really don't want to sound like a poet of wars, but because I write about my own life, and I involve my own life in my writing, and so because I have had quite a few wars in my life, I have had also loves, so poetry has helped me to live with good and bad reality. And I think it's one of the things which poetry does. And later on I shall read one poem which perhaps will stress it out even more. But this speaks about the war of my father, which was World War I. And my father, being a very Orthodox Jew, but also a very good German citizen at that time, back in 1914, well, he went out to that war, and in the hope that it would be the last. That's what all fathers hope. And now with my eldest son in the Israeli Air Force, I'm again in this kind of terrible circle of which I don't know when there's a way out. My father fought their war for 4 years, and he didn't hate his enemies or love them, but I know that even there, he formed me daily out of his little calms so rare. He gathered them out of the bombs and the smoke, and he put them in his freight knapsack with the last bits of his mother's hardening cake. And with his eyes he gathered nameless dead. He gathered many dead on my behalf, so that I will know them in his look and love them and not die like them in horror. And he filled his eyes with them in vain. I go out to all my wars. I shall read that in Hebrew. אבי היה 4 שנים במלחמתם, ולא שנא אויביו ולא אהב, אבל אני יודע כי כבר שם בנה אותי יום יום משלוותיו המועטות כל כך, אשר לקט אותן בין פצצות ובין עשן, ושם אותן בתרמילו הממורטט, עם שארית עוגת אמו המתקשה, ובעיניו אסף מתים בלי שם, מתים רבים אסף, למעני, שאכירם במבטיו ואוהביהם, ולא אמות כמוהם בזוועה, הוא מילא עיניו בהם והוא טעה. אל כל מלחמותיי יוצא אני. I shall now read a very ancient form of Hebrew literature, because actually Hebrew poetry does not have, in the Bible, for instance, which is the start of Hebrew poetry, rhyme and meter like European poetry. Also, modern Hebrew poetry has adapted all these forms many, many years ago, and it's very natural like all other languages. But still there was this interesting form of the quatrain, which is 4 lines, in which the poet had to say a lot of things. It's just in 4 lines with similar rhymes at the end. And it was some kind of challenge in the Middle Ages to both Hebrew and Arabic poets, because that was a form which was also created by Arabs. So I shall read you 2 quatrains which are in which I have used biblical stories, but in a rather modern way. The first story is, hopefully I don't have to tell you the whole story, but about the prophet Jonah, who ran away from God's voice, who wanted to send him to Nineveh to become a prophet, and he ran away from God. And, he knew when and from whom to run away. He always knew if he has to be God's messenger, he'll be in trouble, and sure he was. So he ran away, and God sent this whale, this big fish. So actually, I have used Jonah's story to say something on my own experience. Once I escaped, but I do not remember why or from which God. I shall therefore travel through my life like Jonah in his dark fish. We have settled it between us, I and the fish. We are both in the world's bowels. I shall not come out. He will not digest me. And this other quatrain, which I shall read also in the Hebrew original, is about another very famous story from the first book of Moses, It's a story of the two sisters, Rachel and Leah, the daughters of Lavan. Jacob went there to his uncle Lavan, and you all know that he had to work 7 and another 7 years to get these girls and marry them. But he first wanted to marry Rachel, the smaller of the two girls, because she was much more beautiful, and he didn't want to marry Leah. So Lavan told him, you can't do a thing like that. You have to take first the big girl and then the younger one. So Yaakov was so much in love with Rachel that they agreed to work for another 7 years. And then the time came when Lavan really had to give him Rachel. So he cheated him. He gave him Leah, the uglier sister, and it's written by Hiba Boker, Vinei Leah, and lo in the morning, and she was Leah. Actually, he cheated him very much, but I don't think that a thing like that could happen in our well-illuminated wedding nights of our days. And I've used this poem on a rather sad fact of life, which a lot of people experience. It's morning now, and you are Leah. Last night you were Rachel. It's not that Lavan cheated me in the dark of the night. It will always be like that. That's the world's way. Now you are Leah, yet last night you were רחל. בוקר עכשיו, והנה את לאה, אמש היית רחל. לא לבן רימה אותי בחושך הליל, זה תמיד כך יהיה, זו דרך תבל. עכשיו את לאה, ואמש היית רחל. Actually, it's strange that I should make a sad and serious thing, which is in the Bible is actually it's a tragic story if somebody's cheated and has to work some 7 more years. But to us today, it sounds like some strange kind of slapstick comedy, because it's really, it's like some Buffon theater where and the Bible, by the way, I don't know whether a lot of scholars and rabbis and ministers think about that the first book of Bible has a lot of humor in it, very grim humor sometimes. It's always that the underdog gets the big thing. It's when the prophet Samuel went to make a king, to anoint a new king after Saul. So he was sent by God to Yishai, Jesse, and he was told one of his boys is to be king of Israel. So of course he thought the eldest of the boys, he calls them all home from their fields, and so he said, no, this not, and then he said, well, he asked him, are all the boys gone? All gone? And so he said, yes, actually. Oh, no, there's a little one outside in the field, little David. But so that, and he became the king. Yes. So actually, that's all over the Bible. This kind of humor, which is a very strange humor. It's probably the humor of history. I shall read you another poem, which is not with a lot of humor. It's based on a very famous Jewish prayer, on which is said together with the Kaddish if someone has died. It's actually I think all religions have it. It's a kind of where you pray for peace for the soul of the dead person, and may find peace in heaven. It's actually, and the prayer starts with the words "El Malei Rachamim," which means God full of compassion. And it's actually, I would say, it's one of the things which poetry should do. You should never take anything for granted. And if a prayer says God full of compassion. And the cantor chants it along the graveside, let's say of some young soldier who has fallen in the war. Then you suddenly ask yourself, why, if God is so full of compassion, why there are wars, why there is Holocaust, why there are other bad things? So all official religious people will tell you, it's a way of talking about God. But I think poetry should challenge everything. God full of compassion. Were it not for the God full of compassion, compassion would exist in the world and not only in him. I, who picked flowers on the mountain and looked into all the valleys, I, who carried corpses from the hills, am qualified to report that the world is empty of compassion. I, who was Sultan of salt at the sea, who stood without deciding at my window, who counted the footsteps of angels, whose heart lifted weights of pain in those terrible competitions, I, who use only a small portion of the words in the dictionary, I, who am compelled to solve riddles against my will, know that were it not for the God full of compassion, compassion would exist in the world and not only in him. I shall read that in Hebrew. אל מלא רחמים, אלמלא האל מלא רחמים, היו הרחמים בעולם ולא רק בו. אני שכתבתי פרחים בהר והסתכלתי על כל העמקים, אני שהבאתי גוויות מן הגבעות, יודע לספר שהעולם ריק מרחמים. אני שהייתי מלך המלח ליד הים, שעמדתי בלי החלטה ליד חלוני, שספרתי צעדי מלאכים, שליבי הרים משקלות כאב בתחרויות הנוראות, אני שמשתמש רק בחלק קטן מן המילים שבמילון, אני שמוכרח לפתור חידות בעל כורחי, יודע, כי אלמלא האל מלא רחמים, היו הרחמים בעולם ולא רק בו. A lot of poets in the last 30 years, when modern poetry had this breakthrough, said, oh, you can't write rhymes anymore. It's not natural, and I think it's not true, because rhyme is as natural as non-rhymes. So I've written about a third of my poems in rhymes, but most of the poems that have been translated are those without rhyme, because it's very hard to find two easily similar words. Like if you take, for instance, two English words like child and wild, which are very simple words in your language. And you have to translate it into Hebrew. So suddenly, yeled, and then, but you don't have a word which rhymes, which has the same connotation like wild. So you have to find some word which is not a very used word. So it becomes rather an artificial poem. So, but this is one poem, I think, in which the translator has really succeeded. And it's based on a legal phrase which in Israeli law courts and by lawyers it's used if some people make a contract together. It's some kind of common responsibility. I don't know how you say that in English. It's שניהם ביחד וכל אחד לחוד. So if, for instance, a man and a woman, a married couple, if they rent an apartment and they want to make a contract, so they'll have to put some clause in which says both of them together, I translate it word by word, and each of them by himself. It means that if one of them dies or if they separate, so the other one has still the right to stay in that property, and so it's common, and there's a phrase which is called שניהם ביחד וכל אחד לחוד. I've used it as a kind of returning line and this poem, which is a love poem, both love and war poem, and it's actually I think that legal phrases are sometimes very poetic, not nice, but legal phrases have to be very correct, very short, very compact. And I think a good poem has to do the same. So in a way, I really could incorporate this line into my poem. Both together and each apart. Dearest, the summer is gone to fall, and nobody came to the carnival. The swings keep swinging in the dark, both of us together and each one apart. The ships are lost on the ocean's brow. It is hard to watch over anything now. The fighters waited behind the hill. How much we all need pity still, both of us together and each one apart. The moon is sawing the clouds in half above. Come and we'll go out to halfway love. Just we two will love before the camps are ranged. Possibly everything can still be changed, both of us together and each one apart. My love, it seems, has altered me to sweet drops of rain that was a salt sea. I am come to you slowly, and I fall. Receive me. No bright angels call, for we are both together, each is apart. This next poem is called Letter of Recommendation, and it's about my father, and again, as it happens sometimes in translation, the question came whether to put footnotes or just to let things go. So in this poem, there's a mentioning of a very famous other Jewish prayer, Slichot, which is an atonement prayer, which very Orthodox Jews get up very early out of bed, about a week before the high holidays, and return with sunrise to their homes. I remember my father when he woke me up to this. So there was a question whether to leave the word slichot in transcription and just to have a little footnote, as I did now, or else to leave, to say early prayers, because that's what it is, and leave it. So we decided on early prayers, understanding that actually all creeds and religions like very much to get their believers early out of bed as much as possible, because they can't do anything wrong out of bed. On summer nights, I sleep naked in Jerusalem on my bed, which stands on the brink of a deep valley without rolling down into it. During the day, I walk about, the 10 Commandments on my lips, like an old song someone is humming to himself. Oh, touch me, you good woman. This is not a scar you feel under my shirt. It's a letter of recommendation, folded from my father. He is still a good boy and full of love. I remember my father waking me up for early prayers. He did it caressing my forehead, not tearing the blanket away. Since then, I love him even more. And because of this, let him be woken up gently and with love on the day of resurrection. I shall read that in Hebrew. מכתב המלצה. בלילות קיץ אני ישן ערום בירושלים במיטתי שעל שפת הגיא העמוק בלי להתגלגל לתוכו. ביום אני מהלך ועשרת הדיברות בפי כפזמון ישן שאדם מפזם לעצמו. תגעי בי, אישה טובה. זו לא צלקת שאת חשה מתחת לחולצתי. זה מכתב המלצה מקופל מאוד של אבי, ובכל זאת ילד טוב ומלא אהבה. אני זוכר את אבי שעורר אותי לסליחות, בלטיפת מצחי עשה כך, לא בקריאת השמיכה מעליי, ומאז אני אוהב אותו עוד יותר, ובזכות זאת יעירו אותו בעדינות ובאהבה ביום תחיית המתים. I am big and fat. I am big and fat. Against every ounce of fat was added an ounce of sadness. I was a great stutterer, but since I learned to lie, my speech pours out like water. Only my face stayed heavy, like syllables impossible to pronounce, stumblestones, stammering. Sometimes my eyes still show flashes like fire from remote guns, very far inside me, old battle. I demand of others not to forget, myself only to forget, in the end, forgotten. Instructions for a waitress. Don't remove the glasses and plates from the table. Don't rub the stain from the cloth. It's good to know people were here before me. I buy shoes which were on another man's feet. My love is another man's wife. My night is used with dreams. On my window, raindrops are painted. In the margins of my books are notes by others. On the plan of the house in which I want to live, the architect has drawn strangers near the entrance. On my bed is a pillow with the hollow of a head now gone. Therefore, don't remove from the table. It's good to know people were here before me. This is called All the Generations Before Me. All the generations before me donated me bit by bit, so that I'd be erected all at once here in Jerusalem like a house of prayer or charitable institution. It binds. My name is my donor's name. It binds. I'm approaching the age of my father's death. My last will is patched with many patches. I have to change my life and death daily to fulfill all the prophecies prophesied for me. So they are not lies. It binds. I've passed 40. There are jobs I cannot get because of this. Were I in Auschwitz, they would not have sent me out to work, but gassed me straight away. It binds. Out of 3 or 4 in a room, one is always standing at the window, forced to see injustice amongst the thorns and fires on the hill. And people who left whole are brought home in the evening like small change. Out of 3 or 4 in a room, one is always standing at the window, hair dark above his thoughts, behind him the words, and in front of him other words, wandering without luggage, hearts without provision, prophecies without water, and big stones put there and staying closed like letters with no addresses and no one to receive them. And this last one before the intermission. God has pity on kindergarten children. God has pity on children in kindergartens. He pities school children less. But adults he pities not at all. He abandons them, and sometimes they have to crawl on all fours in the roasting sand to reach the dressing station, and they are streaming with blood. But perhaps he will have pity on those who love truly and take care of them and shade them like a tree over the sleeper on the public bench. Perhaps even we will spend on them our last pennies of kindness inherited from mother, so that their own happiness will protect us now and on other days. I shall read three poems out of 7 laments for the fallen in the war. 1. Mr. Beringer, whose son fell by the canal, which was dug by strangers for ships to pass through the desert, is passing me at the Jaffa gate. He has become very thin, has lost his son's weight. Therefore, he is floating lightly through the alleys, getting entangled in my heart like driftwood. 2. As a child, he mashed potatoes into golden puree. After that, one dies. The living child has to be cleaned after it returns from play. But for the dead man, earth and sand are clear water in which forever he'll cleanse his flesh and purify. 6. In this last of these 7, out of these 7 laments, there's a sentence which is used again in Israel. It used to be, someone died, you said, may you be comforted by the building of the temple and Jerusalem. That was when Jews were all around the world. In Israel, they've said, may you be comforted by the building of the land. So I've used this phrase, which is said by people to, on condolence visits, I've used it in this poem. Is all of this sorrow? I don't know. I was standing in the cemetery, wearing camouflage clothes of the living, brown trousers and a shirt yellow as the sun. Cemeteries are cheap and very undemanding. Even waste baskets are small, just to hold thin wrapping paper of bought flowers. Cemeteries are a well-behaved and disciplined thing. And I shall never forget you, written on a little ceramic plate in French. I don't know who it is that shall never forget. He is even more unknown than the dead. Is all of this sorrow? I think so. May you be comforted by the building of the land. How much more can one build the land to catch up in this terrible 3-cornered contest between comfort and building and death? Yes, all this is sorrow. But leave a little love burning always, as in a sleeping baby's room, a little bulb, without it knowing what the light is and where it comes from, yet it gives a little feeling of security and silent love. This next poem is from a recent book which came out about half a year in Hebrew in Israel, and it's now in the process of being translated, and I've brought with me a few of them. And the name of this book is called A Great Tranquility, Questions and Answers. And this poem has its last line is the title of this new book. People in the big hall under big and painful lights were speaking about the role of religion in our time and about God's place in it. People were speaking with excited voices like at big airports. I left them. I opened an iron door on which was written emergency, and I entered into a great tranquility, questions and answers. And this is another one from this new book, and it's called Air Hostess. The air hostess said, "Put out all smoking material," but she didn't specify cigarette, cigar, or pipe. And I said to her, "You have beautiful love material," but I didn't specify either. She told me to fasten and tie myself to the seat, and I answered her, "I want all the buckles in my life to be shaped like your mouth." She said, "Would you like coffee now or later or never?" And she passed me tall as the sky. The small scar high on her arm showed that she would never have smallpox, and her eyes showed that she would never again fall in love. She belongs to the conservative party of those who have only one great love in their life. Well, this is another love poem, and as it happens with a lot of love poems, people don't write love poems when they are happy in love, when they are together. And if we would record what people say together when they are in love, it would be the most boring poems, I'm sure. And so actually it means that we only appreciate what we are going to lose or what we have lost. And if you have a love which goes on and then they marry and have children and they grow together and it's beautiful and they never divorce, of course, but then it's a very boring, happiness is very boring to describe. And thank heavens in Israel, because we are, there's a lot of all kinds of troubles and things, so it's never boring over there. And anyhow, I'll read you this poem. A pity, we were such a good invention. They amputated your thighs off my hips. As far as I'm concerned, they are all surgeons, all of them. They dismantled us each from the other. As far as I'm concerned, they are all engineers, all of them. A pity, we were such a good and loving invention, an airplane made from a man and wife, wings and everything. We hovered a little above the earth. We even flew a little. Okay, I shall. Also, my supply of Hebrew is running out just now. But I shall read you 3 songs of love in both languages. I shall read first in English and then after each poem the Hebrew original. 1. The rain speaks quietly. You may now sleep. Beside my bed and newspapers rushing wings, there are no other angels. I'll get up early and bribe the coming day that it be good to us. הגשם מדבר בשקט, את יכולה עכשיו לישון. ליד מיטתי משק כנפי עיתון, אין מלאכים אחרים. אשכים לשחט את היום הבא, שיהיה טוב אלינו. 2. You had a love of grapes, many loves, green and round. Your body is full of lizards, they all love sun. Flowers grow in the field, grass on my cheek, anything is possible. I think I have to remark here that there's a proverb from the Talmud which says, Yalu asavim bilchayai, which means, may grass grow on my cheek. If you want to tell someone, it will never be. I shall read it in Hebrew. היה לך צחוק ענבים, הרבה צחוקים ירוקים ועגולים, גופך מלא לטאות שכולן אוהבות שמש. עלו פרחים בשדה, עלו עשבים בלחיי, הכל היה אפשרי. 3. There's another remark here in this translation which was done by Harold Schimmel, and it's Kohelet. Kohelet is one of the books in the Bible, which is actually it's a great existential poem, and it's actually it's a poem of despair and of pessimism, and it was probably one of the latest books to be in the Tanakh, and it's a time when all the books of the Bible had to be collected to become the codex of the Bible. There was a great discussion going on amongst the rabbis whether this book, which is typical for Hellenistic, pessimistic philosophy of someone who has had everything, all the riches in the world, all the women in the world, everything, and he's just bored and he thinks nothing new under the sun, that kind of pessimism. So they probably added the last line, which is, and beyond all, fear God, that's all man has to do. So it made it kosher to put it into the Bible. Anyhow, it's mentioned in this number 3 poem. Always you lie on my eyes. Each day of our life together, Kohelet erases a line from his book. We are the saving proof in the terrible trial. We'll acquit them all. תמיד את שוכבת על עיניי, בכל יום של חיינו יחדיו, קהלת מוחק שורה מספרו, אנחנו הראיה המצילה במשפט הנורא, נזכה את כולם. This poem is called Sadness of the Eyes and Descriptions of a Journey. There is a dark memory on which the noise of playing children is scattered like powdered sugar. There are things which will never again protect you, and there are doors stronger than tombs. There is a melody like the one in Ma'adi near Cairo, with a promise of things which the silence of now tries to keep in vain. And there is a place to which you can never return. A tree hides it during the day, and a lamp lights it up at night. And I can't say any more, and I don't know anything else. To forget and blossom, to blossom and forget is all. The rest is sadness of the eyes and descriptions of a journey. This next poem is actually, I think, my only poem in which I have said something about why I do write poetry or what makes me write poetry. And actually, to sum it up in short, which I always say when asked, is that I write poetry just for myself, to keep going with reality, so that I won't have to run away from reality, so I can live with the good and the bad. There's an old Jewish proverb saying, if you meet the evil one, Satan, don't chase him away, drag him with you into synagogue. It's a very dangerous thing, because sometimes Satan can turn the whole synagogue into some Gehenna. But it means don't try to run away. Just live with evil and try to overcome it and to make him join you. Anyhow, that's the reason. And in this poem I've said it, something like that. When my head got banged on the door, I screamed, my head, and I screamed, door, door. And I did not scream, mother, and not God, nor did I speak of the vision of the end of days of a world where there will be no heads and doors anymore. When you stroked my head, I whispered, my head, and I whispered, your hand, your hand. And I did not whisper, mother, and not God, and I did not see wonderful visions of hands stroking heads in the wide opening heavens. Whatever I scream and speak and whisper is to comfort myself. My head, door, door, your hand, your hand. The diameter of the bomb was 30 centimeters, and the diameter of its effective range about 7 meters. And in it, 4 dead and 11 wounded, and around them in a greater circle of pain and time are scattered 2 hospitals and 1 cemetery. But the young woman who was buried where she came from, over 100 kilometers away, enlarges the circle greatly. And the lone man who weeps over her death in a far corner of a distant country includes the whole world in the circle. And I won't speak at all about the crying of orphans that reaches to the seat of God, and from there onward making the circle without end and without God. Late in life I came to you, filtered through many doors, reduced by stairs, till almost nothing remained of me. You are such a surprised woman, living with half courage, a wild woman wearing spectacles, those elegant reins of your eyes. Things like to get lost and be found again by others. Only human beings love to find themselves, you said. After that, you broke your whole face into 2 equal profiles, one for the far distance, the other for me as a souvenir, and you went. People on this shore will never again step into the footprints which they left in the sand while last passing here. This is a weeping truth, but sometimes it weeps out of happiness about the world being so wide that there is no need to come back to the same places. Everything is up in heaven. Toward evening, I saw a tanned lifeguard bending over a golden rescued woman, reviving her with his breath like lovers. And this poem again, like so many poems, not only of me, but probably of a lot of Israeli writers, is based on prayers, or actually we use prayers sometimes in a completely juxtaposition manner, but we use this in a very natural way, like poets in Europe or in this country would use Christian themes or prayers or things out of Greek mythology. And it's based on the famous first psalm, which says, "Blessed be the righteous man, let him be like a tree planted beside streams of water, not so the evil one, because he shall wither in the wind coming from the desert." I am a man planted beside streams of water, but I am not blessed be the man. The desert is calm all around me, but there is no peace in me. 2 sons I have, one still small, and whenever I see a child crying, I want to make another one, as if I hadn't got it right, and wanted to start afresh. And my father is dead, and God is only one like me, and the hill of evil counsel sails into the night, all covered with antennae up to heaven. I'm a man planted beside streams of water, but I can only weep it and sweat it and urinate it and spill it from my wounds, all this water. And maybe I would like to wind up this evening with a few poems on Jerusalem. The first one is actually a quite angry poem because it's angry about archaeology. And as you all might well know, in Israel, archaeology is a very important thing, and people want to know what was there in the past. But actually, I think there's actually no need for it, because you anyhow know that King David and the prophet Isaiah and Jesus Christ and all other people like that went around to places where we have our shops and markets and bus stations and not. So actually there's no need to convince us. But I myself like it, but I think too much money, public money, is going into these things. It actually should go more up as schools or housing project instead of down into earth because all you get to see is houses. Okay, we knew they live in houses. We knew they used plates and dishes to eat. So we have a piece of platter, and I'm very angry about it. But again, in Israel, it's a very, very important thing, and it has its niceties sometimes in summer when you see all these half-naked Scandinavian girls digging in the earth, and if even some of archaeologists become deputy prime ministers, but that's another sad story. Anyhow, I shall read you this poem. At an archaeological site, I saw fragments of precious vessels, well cleaned and groomed and oiled and spoiled. And beside it I saw a heap of discarded dust, which wasn't even good for thorns and thistles to grow on. I asked, what is this grey dust which has been pushed around and sifted and tortured and then thrown away? I answered in my heart, this dust is people like us, who during their lifetime lived separated from copper and gold and marble stones and all other precious things, and they remained so in death. We are this heap of dust, our bodies, our souls, all the words in our mouths, all hopes. And this next poem is called Tourist, and it's about a female tourist. In Hebrew, you can't, if you hear the word tourist, you don't know whether it's a tayeret or tayar. So in Hebrew, if someone says, I love you, you can't fool around with it. You have to immediately, you know immediately if a man says this to a man, or a man to a woman, or a woman to a woman, and all other varieties of our modern love. So you have, which is actually a very important thing in the difference between European languages and both Arabic and Hebrew. That times and tenses are completely unimportant. Past becomes easily future and vice versa, but you have to be very exact about sexes and other actions. The only thing maybe you should know is the word katamon, which is one of the quarters of New Jerusalem. She showed me her swaying hair in the four winds of her coming. I showed her some of my folding ways of life, and the trick and the lock. She asked after my street and my house, and I laughed loudly. She showed me this long night and the interior of her 30 years. I showed her the place where I once laid the filling. She showed me the stages of joy and my childhood's stubble. I revealed to her that King David is not buried in his tomb, and that I don't live in my life. While I was reflecting and she was eating, the city map lay open on the table. Her hand on Katamon, my hand on hers. The cup covered the old city. Ash dropped on the King David Hotel, and an ancient weeping allowed us to lie together. And people travel far away to say, this reminds me of some other place. That's like it was, it's similar. But I knew a man who traveled to New York to commit suicide. He argued that the houses in Jerusalem are not high enough, and that everyone knows him there. I remember him with love, because once he called me out of class in the middle of a lesson. There's a beautiful woman waiting for you outside in the garden, and he quieted the noisy children. When I think about the woman and about the garden, I remember him on that high rooftop, the loneliness of his death and the death of his loneliness. And the last poem, which is also from this new book, is called Tourists. They come to pay us condolence visits. They squat at the Holocaust Memorial. They put on grave faces at their Wailing Wall, and they laugh behind heavy curtains in their hotels. They have their pictures taken together with famous dead at Rachel's tomb and Herzl's tomb. They lament the beauty of our boys and lust for the harshness of our girls, and they hang their underwear for quick drying in cool and blue bathrooms. Once I was sitting on the steps of David's citadel in the old city. I had put my two heavy loaded baskets next to me. There was a group of tourists standing around their guide, and I became their target marker. You see that man with his baskets? A little to the right of his head, you can see this arch from the Roman period. Yes, a little to the right of his head. But he's moving. I say to myself, redemption can come only if he'll tell them, you see that arch from the Roman period? Never mind it. But next to it, a little further down to the left, there sits a man who has bought fruits and vegetables for his family. Thank you.